begin, I'd like to first welcome on stage for her opening remarks, Deepthi Singhal, Vice President, Fundraising Strategy, Generation India Foundation. Please give a warm round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you've had a wonderful day so far. Welcome to our discussion on Beyond Numbers, how women navigate the workforce. Now, I'm going to spend the next 5 to 6 minutes actually talking about numbers. I know the topic is Beyond Numbers, but I'm going to spend some 5 to 6 minutes talking about the numbers in this space. And I'm sure the panelists will bring in a lot of lived experiences and talk more deep dive into the what and the how and the why of those numbers. Just a second. The presentation is not good. Sorry, we're just getting the PPT up. Thanks. So, over the last decade or so, India has made remarkable progress, we all know, in the field of education. Nearly equal enrollment of boys and girls at both school and college levels. But when it comes to women's participation in the workforce, the story is quite different. India's female labor force participation is only around 33%. Compared to a global average of 51%, and just half of the rate seen in developed countries like US and Australia. So even as we celebrate the progress in classrooms, we must pause and ask, why do so few of these girls actually make it into the workplace? Now, this is the female labor force participation. Next, when we look at the employment gender gap, that is also quite stark. Globally, 45% of working age women are employed compared to 69% of men. In India, that gap widens even more. Only 32% of women participate in the workforce compared to 77% of men. And once they do enter, the pay gap compounds the inequity. Worldwide, women earn 73 cents for every dollar earned by men. In India, the disparity is even greater. Women earn only 40 paisa for every rupee a man earns. That's a 60% wage gap. Clearly, participation is not the same as parity. That is what we're trying to solve at Generation. At Generation India Foundation, our mission is to improve the economic mobility of youth, especially women, so that they can access meaningful and, more importantly, sustained careers. Since 2015, we've trained over 32,000 women across sectors like healthcare, retail, customer service, and increasingly now in technology and green job roles, areas where women have historically been underrepresented. We ensure that at least 50% of our learners are female, and we design our programs not just to train, but to help women stay and grow in the workforce through placement linkages, mentorship, and mindset coaching. Now, we've talked about the training, now sort of moving on towards hiring practices. Anecdotally, we know that finding a job is much tougher for women than it is for men. Now we have data to substantiate this. In our global tech talent report, which surveys thousands of employers as well as job seekers across the globe, we found that every man without a certification who got an interview also moved on to a job offer. In comparison, among women with certifications, only 60% of those who got interviews actually received offers. So then, even when women have the skills, something else is holding them back. It's often biased in hiring practices, selection processes that undervalue women's capabilities. So clearly, participation alone doesn't tell us the full story. For those who do manage to enter the workforce, staying in the workforce becomes the next hurdle. Our Alumni Impact Survey 2025 found that for every one male alumni that opts out of workforce, we have more than 2 women alumni who opt out. The top reasons are there on the slide for you to see: care responsibilities, lack of family support, and inflexible working conditions. But here's the silver lining: 1 in 3 women who left the workforce said they would return. So, if they had the right support, which is flexible work options, childcare, or simply encouragement from their family. That tells us that women don't lack ambition. What they lack is the enabling environment to thrive. So, we've talked about trainings, we've talked about hiring practices, and we've touched upon retention. So, for the women who do stay in those jobs, pay equity becomes the next hurdle and the next stubborn gap. This chart from our global alumni study shows that even when women have the same skills and training, they earn less than men, especially those without college degrees. In non-tech sectors, the gap in earning a living wage is 12 percentage points. Now, this data is, generations data, so mostly for entry-level workers. So bear that in mind. In tech, it's smaller, but still present, a 6 percentage point gap. Education helps narrow this gap, but it doesn't eliminate it, which means skill alone doesn't guarantee equality. The system women work within, therefore, needs to evolve. At Generation, we can prepare learners, and we can support women into jobs. We can build confidence, create employment for them, and engage employers also to make hiring more inclusive. But what we cannot do, and at least definitely not alone, is change the deep-rooted social norms that shape whether women stay in those jobs, grow in them, or get paid fairly for the same work. That would require policy reform, employer commitment, as well as societal mindset change. Because the goal isn't just for women to enter the workforce, it is for them to stay, grow, and lead. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the conversation following.
Thank you, Deepti. I'd now like to welcome the panelists on stage. First, we have Sabina Dewan, founder and executive director, JustJobs Network. Can we have a round of applause? Next, we have Dhruvi Shah, CEO, Axis Bank Foundation. Aparna Mittal, leading DEI advisor and corporate lawyer, founder, Samāna Centre for Gender Policy and Law. Dr. Alaa Murabit, global managing partner, 500 Global. The session will be moderated by Arunesh Singh, CEO, Generation India Foundation.
Well, let me start with welcoming our panel. I think we have a stellar panel, and I extend a very warm welcome to all of you for this session, Beyond Numbers and How Women Navigate the Workforce. We will explore today what meaningful inclusion really means for women, the systemic enablers that we need to create, and how the ecosystem can come together to make women's work truly equitable, dignified, and sustainable. Uh, that women's participation in the workforce, and something that we try at Generation, given the fact that 50% of our learners are women, is that it is not just a statistic. That it is beyond that. That it's really a story of power, parity, and purpose. And that's basically the context that I'd like to set. And I hope all of you have a good time and we all learn from each other. I'd like to start with you, Sabina. Uh, you know, just to sort of set the ground in as far as some definitions and what is the meaning of meaningful inclusion, and what does it look beyond participation matrix, and why do disparities still persist? We just heard that despite of the fact that women have the same skill set, but they still continue to be paid less. So, could you walk us through some of that?
Is this working? Great. Thank you so much, Arunesh, and thanks to Generation India for inviting me to be here today. So I know the title of this session is Beyond Numbers, but I'm also going to, like Deepti, start with a number, right? I'm going to actually talk about the same number that she brought up earlier. So looking at the Periodic Labor Force Survey, female labor force participation in India has actually gone up from 23% in 2017-18 to 42% in 23-24, right? This is a huge jump. If you look at the increase in female labor force participation, that is a huge jump. But if you look closer and you dig beneath this top line figure, what you find is that most of this increase is actually for women in unpaid family work in agriculture, right? Which brings me, I wanted to use this statistic as a starting point because what it tells us is that it's not just a conversation about getting more women into labor markets and more women into jobs, but what kinds of jobs are women actually doing? And the quality of women's employment and the work opportunities and their economic engagement, the quality of the opportunities that are available to them, right? So if you actually look at it, women are doing a majority of the work. Much of it is invisible though, right? So they're involved in care work, domestic work, and as I just said, unpaid work in family farms and agriculture. All of this is actually hugely, making a huge contribution socially and economically, but a lot of it is invisible. And when employment is visible, women are disproportionately represented in low-level self-employment and casual work, right? And the data substantiate, if you look below the top line data, there is plenty of information data, government data, that actually substantiates the fact that women are in poor quality jobs, but they are doing a majority of the work and working very, very hard. So why this, right? Why do we have such exclusion going on? And the point here is that, it won't be a surprise to anyone in this room that there are deep engendered biases, right? But we also address these biases far too long down the line, right? So if you look at how we do our economic planning, how we actually design policies, how we design regulations, women are an afterthought, right? So we go about doing our urban planning, and we go about doing our budget allocations and saying 30% of our budget is going to be in CapEx for infrastructure and construction, which are actually really gender regressive sectors. But what are we doing to actually take into account women's needs, their assets, what they have to offer, their contributions? What are we doing to take all of that account into the policy planning, policy design stage, right? So we'll implement something and then later on we'll be like, oops, we forgot to ask women what they really need, and now let's retroactively try to figure out what we can do about it. So that's a huge problem. The second is that these engendered biases, when it comes to, and I'm talking about public policy and regulations, we also need an ecosystem of policies that support women, right? So we need to be mindful in broad economic policy making and design, but we also need to think about an ecosystem, a basket of policies that are supportive. So what does this include? There's a number of states that have fare-free bus transit for women. So transport, safety, childcare. These are just some of the things that women need in order to actually be able to harness their productive potential. And last but not least, there are lots of engendered biases among employers, right? In many of the interviews that we've done, employers will straight out say, we don't want to hire women because they need more flexibility, that they have more family obligations, that they're more of a liability. And so there needs to definitely be more of an awareness raising, as well as using regulatory tools in order to kind of break over time these engendered biases and foster more awareness. So I will just stop there with a little, few ideas about what meaningful inclusion could look like. Thanks,
Thank you so
Arunesh.
much. And this really sets the context. I really like the fact that you spoke of, the majority of the work is done by women, but it's invisible. And the fact that women are an afterthought. I have worked in sanitation programs in Bihar, and when these toilets were constructed, it was only later found out that they were not customized to the needs of women. They were actually customized for the needs of men. So you're absolutely right, and I think the point of basket of services, it's not just one or two interventions that's really required. It is a basket of services. So thank you so much. That really sets a very good context for us. Dhruvi, I'll come to you. Wanted to bring in. I don't want to restrict, your response, but wanted to get your perspective as a donor, philanthropy and CSR investments. That how can these investments be structured to not only provide access to employment to women, but also create measurable impacts in terms of women's retention, career, progression, and empowerment. More towards the sort of basket of services that Sabina was referring to.
So when we say CSR and philanthropy, it's slightly limited to a certain thought process that we have, right? It doesn't represent the society. The numbers say that the increase in workforce, there is higher participation, but it is also now that we are counting. While we say look beyond numbers, I think numbers are very important. It's just that we are capturing very selective numbers which tune to our narrative, right? They don't tune to the narrative of the society. Why women are less in workforce is because the society is structured in a certain way, and we keep comparing ourselves to the West. We need to also compare our societies, right? So as societies change, I will not necessarily say evolve, the numbers will change, and they will change. The change has started happening. We are not going to, there is no finishing line here, and it's going to change. A different form of inclusion will emerge. But I think we are too focused on women joining formal workforce, pay parity, and we limit all our conversation to that. I also have the opportunity to talk to a lot of women. I'm talking about women who are educated, who we see as potential workforce. A lot of them do not want to work. So this narrative that every woman wants to have a career and work has not been validated. It's our narrative that we want to have. So some numbers around that would be helpful. It's become, women feel guilty in saying, oh, I don't really want to work, at least not full time. I want to have certain flexibility. I mean, there's no space for a woman to have a choice because we've taken the narrative in a different way. Which is why numbers that support the perspective of a woman who's wanting to work, I think we need to broaden that base. What is the role? And again, if we look at women who are in the informal workspace, there are no choices sometimes, right? When a woman has always been a farmer. It's just that we didn't know about it. Since the farming has been there, she's been involved. And like every family, the control of the money lies with the men. And the SAG movement has been has taken some of that control back to the woman, and they manage their lives very differently. The narratives are very different from the narratives we sit and talk here. So sometimes it's important to look at things in context of the woman, not necessarily our context. The role philanthropy, and that's your question, Arunesh, the role that philanthropy and CSR can play is, one, CSR, I mean, we keep using this word interchangeably. So I'm going to give both the perspectives. One, in terms of philosophy, a lot of ESG for corporates is driving the inclusion, which right now is limited to women in workforce, pay parity, is driving a lot of that. So there is a softer mandate, a global responsibility that is creating policies that are inclusive, I would say. It is a journey, it will take time. We have kind of started doing this men versus women. I think if we stop that narrative, there will be far more inclusion, which is owned by everybody, right? So we need to stop this men versus women. Change takes time, it will happen. So as far as that goes, ESG is taking care of that. CSR, now I'm talking about the 2%, the money that goes. Investments you can have investments that look at how to solve this problem, but every investment needs to look at this problem for it to be solved better and faster, because otherwise it will contradict itself. So a general inclusion, a sense of inclusion, which is of the constituent, not about you and me who have a very different privilege to talk about inclusion, which is where we need data. I think our questionnaires need to be a lot more inclusive in itself. Our questionnaires are very, very lopsided. So if we change the questions, we may get a better perspective on how to shape this up. We have very lopsided numbers. So we need data. And it's social change. Social change is very difficult to do. In the social sector, majority work on economic and ecological aspects. Using them to change the society, yes, but changing society is the responsibility of the society itself. A fund cannot trigger it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Dhruvi. I mean, this is great that you're bringing back the question to us that actually numbers are important. Just we are using the wrong numbers, we're using the wrong definitions. And that as we evolve, these numbers will change as well. The fact that we are not providing choice to women, financial inclusion, is that really changing after women get employed? In generation, we found that, the ability of our women learners to take financial decisions definitely improves the family, not just their independence to how to use that money, but also, the families start talking to them about how do we use this money and general participation. So, I really like that. Yes, ESG is, sort of creating more inclusive policies, and that, CSR has a different set of priorities in as far as that is concerned.
I would not say priorities. I think all funding needs to look at inclusion. And just one more point on the young women. I think young women today, informal workforce, are what we all want them to be. And again, numbers don't capture that, right?
Yeah.
And it is creating a very different society for which the society is not prepared for. So we need to be mindful of that as well.
Sure. That makes sense. So I'm going to move this now from systemic enablers to sort of evidence policy, and I'll come to you, Aparna. See, organizations like Generation focus on women entering the workforce. But once we are done with what we do, structural barriers often shift to very different kind of spaces like safety, bias, lack of support. Now, I want you to bring in the legal and the policy lens to this. It's just one, as to what are the biggest gaps that you see between skilling to employment efforts and the workplace frameworks meant to sort of ensure this equity, but sort of bring us the legal part of it. I think that's a very important thing.
Right. Thank you, Arunesh, for having me. When we talk about women's workforce participation, I think, unfortunately, the narrative gets limited to maternity and infrastructure and safety. And I think what we are talking about is we are talking about systemic equality and systemic maturity, that throughout the employee life cycle, which also starts pre-hiring, there has to be equality, equal opportunity, equal pay, and substantive equality. You know, as a corporate lawyer, and I work in the D&I space, I see the good work happening in India, but because your question is on gaps, I am going to bring out some of the gaps which are glaring even in 2025. Through a lot of our work, because our work entails looking at the law plus by best practice plus data, plus, as Dhruvi has said, going to the last person in the chain and saying, what do you want, and how do we customize this? Yes, there is ESG, and there are different words now coming in and driving. But actually what I find is that in itself, the law is quite okay. There are strong laws in India, but what is lacking is implementation. There are laws on equal opportunity, anti-discrimination, equal pay, but where is it lacking? It is lacking when there is no awareness about the law, there is no willingness to implement the law, there are hardly any consequences or accountability. I'll give you two glaring examples, and I'm not talking about companies which are younger, which are yet to mature and evolve. I'm talking about large listed conglomerates which I have had the chance to advise and guide. One large listed conglomerate, of course I'm not going to take names, in 2024, they had a notice put up in their factories. They had almost 50 factories in India saying women cannot be hired. Why? Because somebody thought that women cannot lift a bag of 10 kilograms. So the woman can lift a 12 kg child at home, but the manager somewhere has decided that a woman cannot lift a 5 kg bag. While on their website it says all our factories are automated, so we're anyway not lifting any heavy bags. But that's not where the story ends. When we asked them why aren't they hiring women, you see the BRSR, SEBI filing, they said they have 26% women, but they had 0 women on the factory floor. And we asked them, why is this notice put up? It was worse off. They actually had a letter internally saying if a workman, which is a factory workman, passes away, the job will go to the son or to the son-in-law. And these are large listed companies. So you see the data is there, but why we call it going beyond the data? Because this is lack of accountability. I'll give you another example. One of India's largest companies, they have a workforce of 2 lakh plus. I met one of the group presidents whose own team in the finance area was 5,000 plus across the whole group of companies. He had 0 women in his team. And I said, why are women not topping the CA exams, MBA finance? He said, I get very nervous working with a woman. If she is working at 7 o'clock, I get nervous. So this paternalism, that you are not going to create an enabling environment to make sure the office is safe and there is infrastructure, but you are going to decide that the woman will not be staffed on a project. So either they're not getting hired, or they're getting hired, but you're not staffing them. And I agree with Dhruvi, this is not a man versus woman issue. The person you will give the staffing opportunity will get the experience. In 3 years, they will of course shine because they have done the work. But the person you have hired, but you don't give the work, what's going to happen to them? I see millions and millions of companies who just don't care, because the accountability in the data is only being sought from the top end of the market, the large listed 1,000 companies. Otherwise, there is no data. And who's managing the data? And lastly, because this has become a bit of a joke, and I narrate it in many places, I met the CEO of a large company, and we've been working with them for some time, and he told me, you'll be very happy this year. We promoted 100% women in the vice president basket. And I said, wow, but can you tell me the number? He said, 1. So there was 1 woman. They promoted that 1 lady, and the data was like 100% promotion. So I think we're looking at both quantitative and a qualitative lens. We have to start asking more critical questions. We also have to ensure that there is more accountability and a comprehensive accountability in terms of what is coming out to us. But I don't think this problem will get solved in a day. We need comprehensive questionnaires, surveys. The law has to be more thought through. But instead of going to the top of the funnel and saying, let's change the law, let's please implement what we have, and let's stop glossing over the numbers and projecting them, because under the hood, there's a lot which is not okay, and there's a lot yet to be done to fix that.
Thank you. The legal framework and perspective is really important. It's heartening to know that at least the law is in place and it's okay. It's the implementation that's not okay, and the interpretation and the accountability is missing. You spoke of inheritance, you spoke of paternity, a very patriarchal outlook towards hiring of women, all very true. And, we will dig deeper into the legal aspects of this. I wanted to come to you, Alaa, and, bring in the same perspective of women's health, safety, and well-being, but sort of understand the intersection with economic equity. And how can women in the workforce move from participation to influence, from mere presence to decision-making in an organization?
It's an excellent question, and thank you for having me. I think I'll answer it while also just speaking to some of the comments that other panelists have made. I think we confuse inclusion with intentional representation. And what I mean by that is what we're really looking for is actually representative communities and representative data. And that can actually solve for quite a bit of what we're saying we don't have, which is diverse women's voices, diverse women's experiences, et cetera. And we get that in multiple ways. I mean, the best example I can give here is I actually started my work, I'm a physician by background, but really started in security. I had created a security organization when I was 21. And if we look at the data in security, when you have intentional representation at the agenda setting phase, you're 35 times more likely to have a peace process last 15 years. That's incredible given 90% of peace processes fail within 5 years. It's a huge difference, right? And it's about the fact that in order for you to have a long-term sustainable solution, you do need to have representation of all of the challenges that are faced by that society. And so women, men, everybody brings that to the table. So it's really about what does representation look like? And I think that also helps us with this false dichotomy of is it men, is it women? Do you, wait a second, if women work, then they can't be flexible and they can't have families, et cetera. Like there's a huge way we can actually talk about that is do we have a representative body? Do we have representative data? Because I think that then shifts the conversation. Beyond just the policy pieces, and I really appreciate you hitting on the accountability aspect, because incentive is actually oftentimes the most important aspect of policy. Are you incentivized to be accountable? What is the incentive when you're not accountable? What happens? What's the consequence? But one thing I like to remind people when we talk about gender equity is men have gender too. From a very young age, we should be talking to girls, boys, we should be talking to everybody about women's employment, about what does an equitable workforce look like, about health, about economic opportunity and dignity, because it has implications across the board. And many countries right now that are dealing with the reality of an aging population and very low fertility rates are in the thick of this. Because for the better part of 50 years, we've been talking about it as a dichotomy of, okay, well, if women work, then it does mean less flexibility at home. And India might not be there yet, but it will be very, very soon, because the TFR here is, I think, 1.9. So you're going to be looking at a very real economic question about how do we sustain our economy if we're not supporting families, not just women, that's the key word, families. If we're not supporting families to both be economic drivers and community drivers, population drivers, because you're going to need both, right? And countries that have done this well have supported things that are male-gendered too, like paternal leave, engagement with fathers, et cetera, to really be able, engagement with male management, to really be able to ensure that there's that type of productivity across both public and private spaces, right? And I think that those would be kind of three pillars where we really need to be looking at if we're talking about long-term economic opportunity, growth, health, and really sustaining the economy that we have, recognizing the population dividend. And then I would say, I mean, I give a huge amount of credit. I think sometimes we always talk about the moment we're in as the moment we're going to solve everything. And my mom always humbles me very much. She says, there's been generations before you, and they all push it a little bit farther. They all leave the world better than they found it. What makes you think your generation is going to solve every single problem? That's a little bit of humility. And so what I say to that is we have gotten nowhere without the audacity of dignity and hope and activism and engagement and social change. I think that is a very active choice. It is a courageous choice. And I think as we think about how we solve this, it's not going to happen overnight. When you talk about behavioral and social change, when we talk about the gendered realities, a lot of that is shaped by people's context, their lived experience, their own family, how they're incentivized in their own community, the stories they tell themselves about themselves. And so I think when we're thinking about it from that perspective, appreciating that the best we can do is farther than what was there before us. We leave it better than we found it. And in order to do that very effectively, I think it's asking yourself, in your sphere of power, in my role, what can I be doing? We always look at the big systems and we're like, let's transform the systems. Systems transform because everybody takes a bite out of them, right? And so in your space, with your community, in your faith community, your school, your workplace, your family, what are you doing? What are you saying that is shifting the needle on the conversation that isn't oversimplifying it to just like, oh, well, will women work? Do they stay at home? Oh, men versus women. But is instead giving it the nuance. And then how are you leveraging your access, your voice, your experience, your organization, et cetera, to be able to create space for other people to either have the conversation, for women to be able to engage in the workforce differently, for different policies to be known and heard. I mean, one thing you said that was remarkable was like people don't have the awareness of it. What is the role then for people who do have the awareness to be able to ensure that every young woman and man knows the accountabilities, right, and knows the consequences? What does that look like in action to know the full suite of tools at your disposal? So all to say, we can talk about the building blocks of women's health and women's education and women's workforce participation is really critical to economic growth and opportunity, and it is. We know that women have access to financial services and decision making. They make fundamentally different decisions. Their children live longer. They actually end up having a much higher lifetime return and net worth for their family. It creates a significant amount of workable capital in their community. They reinvest around 90% into their community. So we know the data. I don't think this is a data problem, though. I think this is very much a human challenge, and a question we should all ask ourselves is, what is my role in it?
Thank you. The fact that you're saying that it's everyone's responsibility makes so much sense. I'm also, you took it beyond accountability, like Aparna said, as to what are the consequences if you are not adhering to, these policies. I love the fact that you said that it has to be inclusive in the sense that you have to talk to the boys as well. I was leading a very large sexual reproductive health program for USAID at the time, and the whole idea around talking about normalization of contraception had to do with men as much as you had to do with women. So, that makes a ton of sense. A generation, we also talk to our gatekeepers when we talk to getting women into the workforce. And we have to talk to the males of the house. You have to explain it to them, to the father, to the brother, to the husband, that look, this is what she's signing up for. And if you don't do that, I don't think there's any, the intentional inclusion doesn't really come into play. But thank you. Dhruvi, I'll shift to you, sort of try and get the industry lens from you. Now, most skilling and livelihood programs measure success through participation and income gains. I mean, we are guilty of doing that, we do as well. But true economic mobility of women really depends upon deeper shifts in confidence, in agency, in the ability to stay and grow. I wanted to ask you, since skilling programs, we can't change social norms. We are not structured for that sort of change or behavioral change. What can realistically we do, to help women to stay and grow in the workforce? To stay and grow in the workforce?
I think projects get designed to solve problems in bits and pieces because you can't solve everything together because then nothing will get solved. So skilling programs came to place to solve one small gap of saying, okay, let's skill people, let's create opportunities to find jobs, and that's about it. So skilling programs serve a very limited purpose of skilling people to have opportunities. The fact that people don't stay in jobs, women more than men, is many, many factors to that, and we are just starting to realize that. And we take a step outward to say, okay, let's try and solve that problem because we seem to have solved, or we can't solve more than this about skilling and putting people. Which is why we are now talking about what more to be done. Because we just assume that once we train people, they'll stay on jobs. That's not happening. We need data information. What we know now is there are many reasons why people stay in jobs. We know reasons why people leave jobs. We don't know reasons why women stay in jobs. So if we know those reasons and we know reasons why they don't stay in jobs, maybe we can collectively solve better. Very simple things. I don't have a social circle. I don't have my kind of food. So if you, and the lessons are all there around us. If you look at traditional migration of unskilled labor, the migration has roots. Roots, I mean, not like roots, but routes, right? So one example, Odisha to Kerala.
Yeah.
There's a whole chain of migration that happens because they migrate as a community. So they have the strength of community at the destination. Now, if I don't have that, people are not going to stay back, right? So the examples are all around us. We just thought, oh, that's not right, let's do something else. So there's some very logical things that have worked for years. And if we learn from those things that have worked and try and incorporate, I think we'll have faster answers instead of trying to search them and recreate them all over again. I think organizations need to slightly change the way they hire and way they retain and the way they place people. Could be one way, but again, we need data. To go to a corporate, to go to a workforce, we don't have that data. So again, comes back to need of data beyond the norm or what is most popular right now.
Sure. No, thank you. Learn from what we already know. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, use data accordingly. We know there are migration patterns in this country. If we use them, you will be able to get to the solution a lot faster. So, now let's shift to evidence and data. And Sabina, your work has been very interesting around being data-centric. You have a very data-centric approach. And what the team found really interesting is that you have a JustJobs state index. And we really want us to talk about the women-centric data from there. I mean, I'd personally love to know how states are different, when it comes to this sort of a data. That would be a very rich, learning for all of us. Please.
Thank you, Arunesh. I'm looking at the clock, and we have 7 minutes.
That's okay.
I don't think I can explain the index in 7. Partly because, if you will allow me, I wanted to respond to a couple of things that I heard on the panel, if that's okay. And then, if we have time, I'll come to the data. But, incredibly powerful women, I heard 3 words that I want to pick up on from what each of you said. So, Alaa, you talked about representation. And I think that's fundamentally important. But representation is also a matter of power, right? I was in Begusarai in Bihar, and I was talking to a bunch of women in a semi-rural area. And they kept saying to me, and I will switch to Hindi and then I'll translate. They kept saying to me, "Didi, हमें कोई काम दिलवा दो. हम घर से बाहर नहीं निकलते. हमने पढ़ाई नहीं की है. हम क्या काम करें? आप हमें कुछ तो काम दिला दो क्योंकि हमारे घर में इज्जत ही नहीं है." Right? I have no respect at home. I'm not allowed to leave my home and I have no education. Can you get me something to do to earn an income? And this is a story that is repeated in Sudhar Camp in Delhi, and it's repeated in Gulbarga in Karnataka. This is a story that's repeated in India, one village, one slum after another, where there are still huge power differentials. And I'm not undermining the inherent, innate power that women have, right? But in society, women in parts of India are still struggling. And so to even have representation in the right circles is fundamentally important, as that is, they don't have representation. So we need to actually talk about and work on and dismantle the current power structures in order to actually bring about fair representation. The second was what Dhruvi mentioned about choices. And that follows directly from representation and power. Because if you don't have power and if you don't have representation, then you don't really have a choice, right? If you look at the time use surveys in India, men only do like 3 hours of work relative to all the other work that women do, right? Again, going back to my earlier point that women are the ones that are doing the majority of the work. Now, do women want flexibility? Yes, they do. But why do they want flexibility? Because they are so overburdened with everything that they have to do. I mean, I bet everyone in this room knows women that will come and say, you know, perhaps the maid in your house that will come and say, Didi, mujhe subah 4 baje utna padta. I have to get up at 4. I have to cook for my husband. I have to send my kids off to school. I have to go pray at the temple and get water, whatever it might be. And then I have a few hours to work, right? So this is not a narrative about, you know, women having we have choice. I have choice. I can live in Goa. I can be flexible in my work environment. But in the country that we live in, there isn't enough power among many women, and therefore their choices are actually very, very limited. And so absolutely fundamentally important, representation, choice, but that's what we're advocating for, and that's what we need to get to, right? And finally, accountability. I mean, I think I don't really need to elaborate on that, but accountability for our systems, accountability for the men in our lives, you know, in order to be able to expand the power and choices that women have. So Arunesh, if you'll give me one more minute, I can go into the data, or I can stop, as you wish.
If the audience can give us another 4 minutes, then, you know, perhaps we could
Okay.
do that. Yeah.
All
Please.
right. All right. So I'll just quickly just saying that, you know, there's huge variation. So while there are women that, you know, may, if they have the choice, choose not to be in the labor market, I'm going to talk a little bit about the women that are in the labor market, either by choice or by compulsion, but they're in the, you know, they're working. And there you really see, again, this problem with the quality of work that women are relegated to, right? So the share of women in regular wage jobs has actually gone down. And now regular wage jobs are what we consider to generally be formal employment. And that's gone from 21% to 16% between 2017-18 and 23-24, right? That's a huge drop. At the same time, there's been an increase in what is self-employment. Now, self-employment has gone up from about 52 to 67%. Now, self-employment, if we look at it from our lens, may not seem so bad, but in reality, that is very, you know, your self-employment includes vegetable vendors. It includes women doing all kinds of survivalist, small, you know, selling food by the roadside. Those kinds of activities make up the majority of what is self-employment, right? And then if you look at wages within the self-employment category, real wages in self-employment have gone down by 32% during the same time period, okay? So, you know, we're sitting here, we're talking about the importance of representation, we're talking about the importance of power and choices for women and the importance of accountability, but most of our data is actually pointing to a downgrading of the quality of work that most women have available to them. Again, that probably doesn't necessarily apply to many of the women in this room who are incredibly privileged. We have our own share of harassment and issues in the workplace, let's be real. But I think this is really important, that there is a long road ahead, and we need to be very clear about, you know, fighting the good fight to bring about greater equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabina. I'll come to you, Aparna, very quickly. You know, if you could, I think we have another 4 minutes, 5 minutes. That's great. So, you know, maybe you could just point out to some, maybe 2 most effective legal or policy interventions that you've seen that ensure women's inclusion.
Right. I think what I have seen, and with our work that we have done across sectors, is I think where you put it on the management's table and you put it on the management agenda, things move. You can develop holistic 360-degree evaluations, which are a mix of policy analysis in that company, because we're talking about micro data now. We are hearing from the panelists there is no data. So my answer is pick up one company, get the management to put it on the management's agenda. If they can track the sales targets, they can track what's happening in the workforce. Do a 360-degree evaluation of policy, process, data, interview the women on the floor of the organization, find those local micro problems inside the company, like Dhruvi is saying. There are problems, but we don't find the right problems and solve them. I'll give you one example, one quick example. We looked at a large company. They had lots of women in the corporate office in Bandra, but 0 women in the factory in Vashi. Why? Because there was no transport for a woman to get to the factory at 8 in the morning. So, you may have to customize your problem statement, your diagnostics, and your solutions through your company and where you are located, what kind of work you do. What may work for a factory may not work for a corporate office. And lastly, I think what really pushes this is that issue of accountability. When I have seen managements use organizations like ours to do that deep dive assessment and diagnostic, it is also the funder's job in a lot of cases. Out of 100 corporate clients, which I can anecdotally state, at least 75% of them did this work because some PE investor sitting there was pushing for systemic change. In the non-profit sector, where I have seen focus on safeguarding, on better incentivization, supply chain management, it has come from the funder saying, if you want the money from us, it's not just about your outcomes, we want you to fix 30 of these problems as well, at least diagnose and fix. So I think the funding route, if you look at it as a substantive tool of change, it can actually make a big difference. And a lot of international clients that we work with, both on the for-profit and the non-profit side, they do exactly that. They put it on the management's table, they create accountability, then you do a systemic audit for that company, which can be completely different from another one, and find those small or big micro problems and fix them, and one by one just have a 5-year roadmap on what you can do. That's from my side.
Thank you so much. Alaa, I'll come to you, and I'd request you to sort of bring in the global perspective. Globally, there are a lot of lessons that India is learning and continues to learn. From countries that have, as we know, successfully reduced pay gaps and created enabling environments for women's leadership. So from your global experience, what is the one or maybe two, investments or systems innovation you believe could unlock the biggest gaps that exist, development as far as India is concerned?
In short, I think there's 2 things that we see. One is actually girls' education and girls' access agency over their own bodies. So having active decision and choice over your own body, if you want to marry, when you want to marry, if you want to have children, when you want to have children, et cetera, is a huge lever for further public participation of women, be it economic, political, social, et cetera. And the second I would say is more systemic and institutional, things like access to credit, et cetera. We've been talking a lot about kind of the labor force, women being employed. But it's actually a lot more powerful when women are the employers, when women have access to credit, when women have the digital public infrastructure and the financial services to really be able to drive large-scale transformation in their communities is really important. I'm going to touch on a couple of things that were said just because I think they're important. From a behavioral sciences perspective, in terms of how a theory of change works, and I fully agree with you, the underlying conversation about all of this is power. Equity is power. Money is power. But representation comes before inclusion. If you're not represented in the room, you can't be included in the conversation. And I think we always fall to inclusion, which actually does privilege the privileged. People who already have voice and access get to be the ones then dictating the conversation. So it is actually really important to be thinking about how those women in those communities are represented in the same rooms you're represented in. That is actually how you lead to shifting the conversation away from the denominator where those who already have access, voice, influence, et cetera, get to be the ones who dictate the negotiation terms, right? And then the second thing I'll mention is, I think and this is actually probably a call to action if for all of us, but something really key in cultural change and shifts is that you need 30%. I'm Canadian, so we call it the hockey stick method, but I'm sure there's a term that's more relevant in this context. But you need 30% of a population to start shifting its behavioral pattern in something for it to shift the norm, the social norm. And given the significant percentage of women in the informal labor force and the fact that the informal labor force is made up of society, a question I think we should all be asking ourselves is, are we actively investing in other women? Are we actively investing in them? Are we purchasing from them? Are we investing in their companies? Are we giving a standard and fair living wage to our own employees? Are we communicating to others the importance of that? Because it really is. It is the communities that have the most access, most influence, and most resources that are going to be on the front lines of this transformation. That's the nature of social change. And so it is when those with influence, resource, access, and power say, I am going to shift the way in which I engage with power, in the way in which I engage in this conversation, that's what transforms it. So a call to action to everyone here is, how are you using your resources, voice, and power to ensure that other women who are not represented in this room are represented, and so they can be included?
Thank you. That's really powerful. We have another 4.5 minutes left. We have 3 questions. We had a third last question. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do that. But we'd love to take some questions from the audience. So I'm going to start. They haven't mentioned as to who. Actually, there are 4 questions. I'll probably pick 2. The first one is, how does current perception of feminism influence the way women navigate their careers in the workforce? This is for all of you. This doesn't really mention, unless it's the person who's asked want to.
I think it's open to all.
It's open to all? Okay. So.
This is probably not going to answer your question. And I don't speak for anyone else on the panel or in the room, but I have a complicated relationship with the word feminism. I firmly identify as someone who fundamentally believes in women's equity, leadership, and power. I have a challenge with it from a very personal perspective of, when people call me a feminist, they call me a Muslim feminist, or they call me an African feminist or an Arab feminist. And I have a challenge with any word where you need a qualifier to be part of that community. I think it tells me a lot about then who gets to create the normative framework around that word and the definition for it. So that is a personal answer. I find that a lot of women my age have that challenge for different reasons. And I don't want it to negate from what I think is women's inclusion and leadership. So the way I've approached this in my own community and in my own work is not allowing it to become a conversation about terminology, because I think we can get really bogged down in those. And I would argue very effective movements, frankly, can be derailed by, okay, well, are we a feminist? I don't know if I'm a feminist, but I think there's a fundamental alignment on women's leadership and right to choice and dignity. And I think if we can all agree on that every single person has the right to choice, dignity, and equal opportunity, I think it shifts the conversation, and it stops becoming about what terminology do you identify as, and you might have someone in the room being like, well, feminism is bad for men, and it removes that, and it actually becomes about what is the legitimate problem we're trying to solve. So that would, because of my own personal relationship, I put that out there because hopefully it will help others who are trying to navigate that reality in their own community. But I find a lot of spoilers and people who want to leverage misinformation and want to be detractors to the issue will use feminism as like this token word that riles everybody up. So I don't even allow it. I say, no, I hear you on feminism. Completely understand, it's very nuanced. I'm focused on equal dignity, opportunity, and choice for everyone. And it lets you focus on the problem, not on all of the red herrings that people will want to bring into the debate.
Sure. Anyone of you would like to? Perfect. So I'll pick out one last question. Do you feel that future looks brighter in terms of DEI/inclusion? Is the next generation more equipped for it? And how do we work with them?
I think I can answer that question because I practice that. I also want to clarify that DNI is not a new age word. It sits in the Indian Constitution, which came out in 1950. And DNI is not just about women, it's about caste and gender and religion and faith and every kind of diversity in that room. So, to pick up the DNI as a foreign concept and then throw it out saying it's a foreign concept is a wrong approach. We have very strong roots within our legal framework and the Constitution which talk about equality. So I don't want to, of course, conversations change and they evolve and we're all learning, but I don't want to make it look like it's a new concept and it will change with generations. I think that it is equally a responsibility of each generation in this room to own it, to do something within their sphere of influence. Open that door, get the mic to somebody give that opportunity. If all of us do that little tiny step, I think that collective change will will make D&I more achievable for the world. Because we can't go and change the world, but you can change the world you inhabit in the little influence or sphere of influence you have around you.
What is excluded also changes with time. And by focusing on inclusion, we don't focus on what we are excluding today. So it's important to have a sight on, we can't, it will evolve into something, there will be something excluded. What is the importance of that exclusion in a particular context? I think one needs to be mindful of that. So, yeah.
Would you like to add anything?
I fully agree with the sphere of power, but I'm so worried about the next generation. So, I mean, no, and let me explain why, okay? If you look at all the studies, we have a huge divide between where young men are and where women are, politically, socially, like so I really want to reiterate the earlier point about like we need to get out of our own way and stop making this feel like gender is only for women or it's a one-sided, and we need to talk about this as this is what will give better opportunities for all. We are in this together. And I think the sooner we can do that, the sooner young men don't feel like they're being excluded, et cetera, and the sooner young women recognize that they are part and parcel of a much larger movement that isn't constrained just by gender. Like I really emphasize it because if you look at the data, it's actually very concerning about where there is a huge generational and gender divide on the assumption of rights, roles, responsibilities. And if we don't get ahead of it, we are going to be really burned by it in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We're getting burned by it today. So the sooner we can bring more people under the tent and say, actually, gender equity is for men, it's for women, it's for families, it's for community, it's for our own economic growth and opportunity, the sooner people can realize it's actually an existential security and economic issue for every country, and it's not gendered and it's not ideological and it is political because there is a power dynamic there, but it's necessary, I think the better for everyone. So unless we start having more men on these panels, unless we start having a bigger conversation about what does it mean to be a young man in an economically equal household and community, I am actually quite concerned about what that means for future generations as they dabble in this.
Thank you. And
To be fair, I think Generation India did a very good job of the gender balance on this panel because the number of panels that I go to, I really appreciate you being on the panel, Arunesh. So
thank you so much. I represent the diversity, I guess. But this has been a great panel. Thank you so much for your insights. And I think all of us have learned a lot. In my view, this is absolutely brilliant. I am very grateful for your participation. Thank you so much.